Welcome to Better Returns, where you will learn how to escape the volatility of the stock market by passively investing in real estate like a pro. 90% of millionaires earned and maintain their wealth by investing in real estate. We will share real-life examples from savvy investors so you can do the same. He once lost his entire family in the Grand Turkish Bazaar in Istanbul. Your host and my dad, Matt Hansen.
Well, welcome back to the show. I've got one of my good friends, Matt Sutika, on the call here with us, and we're going to talk about insurance. Exciting stuff, but it really is, and it's so crucial. So Matt's the Chief Insurance Officer at Obie, the insurance company that we use for all of our large multifamily deals. It's a startup company that's been around for, like 5 years now. Has Obie been around about 5 years?
Yep, 5 years, yep.
So they have great relationship with, they're really kind of a tech company. They have great relationships with the brokers and investors like myself. And prior to going to Obie, Matt was the #1 largest State Farm agency in the United States. Is that right? Number one?
Number one, fastest growing.
Fastest growing. And you got so big, then you kind of merged with Obie, and now you're doing even bigger stuff than you were doing in the past, and you have a bigger budget behind you. I know you guys did a Reg A raise of like $13 or $15 million and all that. So phenomenal background before you even came to Obie. And so we're going to kind of take it off from there. Again, you're one of the key business partners that we have. Our second largest expense in running in a multifamily or an apartment operation. #1, taxes. #2, insurance. That's how important this role is, and Matt's role in all of the deals that we do. So that's a little background. You want to say anything more, Matt, about your company before we get into the case study we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, no, I think that was a great intro. Definitely, I'm sure at this point, after your audience just heard taxes and insurance, that they are just super excited of what we're going to chat about today. But hopefully, if they're listening to this, they understand that these are recession-proof necessary evil items, if you will, as part of the overall deal, and there is some benefits to having some knowledge in these particular areas that can help you, whether you're passive or whether you're actually syndicating a deal. So I think we'll have some exciting stuff for them.
It will be, and you're fun to talk to. So we're going to do a case study. We have a deal right now, and it's a 506C, which means it's for accredited investors only, but we can openly talk about it, so we can use this as our case study. So we've got a 227 unit, $40 million deal in Jacksonville, Florida, that myself and my business partners are working on. And of course, Matt, before we even make the offer, we're on the phone to Matt. We send him all the deets. We know what he needs, the property, the year, and all these details. Before we put an offer in, Matt's one of the first guys we talk to in Obie. And so we need to find out, okay, what are the costs for the insurance? And it's really location dependent, property dependent, but he'll go into that. So we're going to kind of do a case study on an actual deal that he's working on right now for us. So let's talk about that. Ricardo, my business partner, underwrote it. Hey, it looks good. Underwriting is a fancy word for economic analysis. We think, hey, we can make an offer on this. Before we make an offer, we call Matt. Now, what do you do, Matt? What do you do? What's the next step?
So the next step is at that point is trying to get an estimate for what the insurance, right? It's probably the most difficult thing that we do is this pre-underwriting, maybe even under contract estimate for the insurance for a lot of reasons. One, it's probably not at that point, it's probably not closing for 3 months, 6 months, who knows, right?
Right.
Two, you mentioned Ricardo in this case study, it's going to be Florida, so you have certain states that can add some different dynamics, right? Some of the best states for investing, right? And that return also have, some of the more challenging, insurance things that we got to be aware of. They're not an issue, but, a little bit more complex than, let's say, Indiana, right? Or something like that in the middle of the United States where, or Arizona, where they haven't had a claim in 100 years, I don't think, or, something like that. So, so Ricardo will come to us and, we usually have an operating memorandum at that point, hopefully, or at least the off-market details. And what we're going to try to do is, and over on our LOI, or our letter of intent team, is kind of give a low end, high end estimate for what we think that this is going to come in at, right? The reason we do a low end, high end is not to just like be vague, but to help the syndicator at that time understand the next journey or next steps in the process, right? So with the low end estimate, we give the estimate, but then we give a 4, 5, 6 bullets of like, okay, this is based off of, eventually you're going to find out whether it has losses or not. You're going to find out about the wiring. You're going to find out, when things have been redone, right? And so what I'm really doing, or what we're really doing, is we're letting that syndicator know things to look out for, right? And then on the high end, we're saying, hey, based off things coming back with 2 losses and straight aluminum wiring and hasn't been updated since 1955, right? And when you touch the roof, it just falls in, it's sandpaper. All these things, you're probably going to get leaning here towards the high end, right? Try to make both numbers work in your underwriting, and then what it really does is this trigger. So as you go under contract, you start getting that information from the seller, you start doing your due diligence, you can start to constantly tweak your numbers because I'm telling you the roadmap of which way we're going. You start seeing that there's no losses, roofs were redone, it's copper wiring, all these pretty great things, right? You're like, oh, I can probably stick more closer to Matt's low end, right? All of a sudden it's $1 million fire loss, aluminum wiring, no updates. It's like, ooh, I better get closer here. And then if there's things that are beyond even what's in that high end, that's probably where we need to have another phone call, because it might even be worse than the high end, right? But if I don't give you that roadmap and I just say, hey, it's either going to be $300 or $400 per door, this is what we used to do years ago and what a lot of brokers are still doing, you have no placebo, or you have nothing to compare where those numbers are coming from. So you have no reason to reach back out to us or tell us anything different, right? Or to update us. So that's been really successful that we do. And so that's what we're doing up front. From there, we give, those estimates. And then really the next step is a long process to wait for the lender, their requirements, and those third-party data, right? And then that's when we really get kicked in again is, and that usually happens anywhere from 20 to 30 days before closing.
And that's a really good point, that our numbers are constantly changing when we first put the offer in, and then we have to create our private placement memorandum and all that. A lot of that stuff we have to put in place before we even know really what the insurance is going to look like. But that's what's great about what you do there with Obie, is that you give us a range, and we usually take the highest number. If Matt gives us a high number, we use the high number, because think that's worst case scenario. That's what we want to plan for. And if we end up below that and find out, oh, it's not that, it's in much better shape than we thought, it's great. It's gravy. But we always take Matt's highest number because he does such a great job of analyzing it, and you keep us up to date. It's constant, like you said, it's a constant communication. It's just not a set it and forget it. When we initiate it, you're in constant contact with ourselves and our general partners and the property manager. You're keeping up to date on what's going on, their findings as you get farther into the due diligence. I think that's super, super great. So tell us about, okay, you've got all the stats for it. Where the market is. How do you go out and actually get us the insurance? Because you're really an insurance broker, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell us what goes in the next step then.
Yeah. So the next step from there is, I'm starting to come up with who we're going to go out to market to. So I'm signaling to those carriers, hey, we have this risk, what do you think about it? What does it look like? It's probably not closing for, hopefully I have some type of indication from the person syndicating at that time of when it's going to close. Hey, it's going to be December. It's going to be, overall, do you have an interest, right? And if you have an interest, what does this look like? I don't want to nerd you out, but we use the term like cent rate, which is like our way of like estimating what the premium might look like. And how a cent rate works, just for those who are really analytical, is they say it's going to be 64 cents. You take that 64, you times it by your total insurable value, and I'm probably nerding so many people out right now, and divide it by 100, and that's how you get your property premium, right? Which is always the biggest line item in the insurance. So we're just starting to get that. We're probably not going to fully quote it out at that point, because most quotes are only good for anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So if you're going to be outside of that, you don't really want to get it fully quoted. But we're just kind of trying to slowly piece things together, get an idea of where this is going to be, because really it's a full journey, whether it's 30 days to close, 60 days, 120 days to close, of just constantly tightening the screws, right? Everything we get from the syndicator, we can tighten or move. Every response back we get from a carrier, we can kind of tighten or rotate a button, and kind of see what we're going on. and we're just constantly moving. Then the lender comes in and says, here's the requirements we have. Here's the building amount we need. Here's the rental income. Here's the umbrella. You tweak it. And really that's what we're doing the whole time. And as you mentioned before on the estimates, right? There's a lot of brokers out there, a lot of syndicators out there, right, that I think get that space wrong, right? Insurance, I'll use loosely. I'm not going to say it is what it is or the numbers are what they are, but I see too many people in the industry, like just pushing so hard to get a low number, and so many brokers just trying to estimate low numbers just to make each other happy during the underwriting process. But it never actually comes to fruition once you go under contract or when you actually have to do it. But, this syndicator really wants the deal and has to have it at 500 a door. And this broker really wants to earn the business. So they'll tell them it's 500 a door, right? And then it's 900 a door, right? And so sometimes our struggle is as we get new clients or we have new relationships, right? Like, because we're very honest, and my team from LOI to under contract, I tell them every time, do not make me look bad when this goes under contract. Like, you need to, I'm serious, right? Like,
right. It's called retrading. Yeah. Are you not going to retrade?
But yeah. I will tell you, if we ever lose a client during that time frame, it's because of like a low bid. And then we do get that call, and it's usually after closing or close to it. And it's like, you were right here. I hated your numbers, but they were right. And that's, and we're in a bear market right now too, right? Like bear market for the stocks, bear market for everything. And calling it a bear market might be nice for how things are at the moment, right? But we're in that way for insurance too, right? And so we're not in a state of great pricing. We're not in a state of like, insurance numbers are going to save a deal here or help your underwriting. We're in a state of like accuracy right now, right? How accurate can we be? Because I'd rather you walk away from a deal at this point and not do it if you can't get the insurance number, other than, I don't want the cut the proceeds conversation happening because of my watch, a week before closing or 2 days before closing. That's not going to happen because of us, or that's our goal at least, right? Like sometimes things are out of your hands, but because we also, like, I understand the investing side of things because I've been around you and and the people you invest and work with so long. Like, I understand NOI, I understand cutting proceeds, I understand that process too. And that helps with the insurance piece because I can speak your language and I know at your certain points of what you're doing. We're talking about what's the insurance process from start to finish. We actually understand the process for you as a syndicator start to finish, and we figure out where the insurance fits into that and not the opposite.
Exactly. You really do. Because Matt attends all, like, we have a masterminding group. Matt's there with his team. It's like phenomenal. So he knows exactly what we're doing. And another thing you touched on, transparency. There's no hidden things we're dealing with the Obie. You guys are just straightforward. We know your good numbers. And that's why I think we've done like 103 deals in the last few years. I think you got every single one of them. In our group, because you guys are so good. We can trust you. We know that, okay, we're not going to read at the last minute. And this is what lending brokers will do. And that's why we have great lending brokers that we work with. Because if you go directly to a lender, sometimes at the last minute, they'll, oh, nope, you're not getting 5.4, you're getting 6%. And it's a day before close. You can't do anything. You've got to close. So you just have to take it. That's why it's important to work with somebody like Matt, like we do with our lending brokers, the same thing. So how many different, so it's based on this properties in Jacksonville, Florida, $40 million, based on the location and the age, the vintage as we call it. How many insurance companies do you usually reach out to based on that criteria? There's only X amount that will meet that criteria that are best fit. How many do you usually reach out to?
Let's try it a different way. So there's hundreds of carriers, right? And if you imagined taking all, let's just say there's 100, right, that do property insurance in the United States. I'm just an example, right? And we have access to a good majority, if not most of them, right? You take that 100 and you kind of start at the top, right? The first thing that happens is what state, right? And you pick Texas. Well, now 20 of them write Texas. So you're down to 20, right? And then call it wiring, right? It's aluminum mitigated. Well, now that goes down to 7, right? That will write that, right? Type deal. And then, has a loss. Oh my gosh, now it's down to 2, right? And don't pay attention to the actual like 100 to 20 to 72.
I know, but roughly, yeah.
But more that's kind of the process. So in particular states, right, you have less options to start with. And so when you lose an option, it's bigger. You know, some states like let's call it Tennessee or Indiana or Illinois, Ohio, some of those ones, they're starting with that 100. And every time you add something, you're maybe losing 5 or 10, right? In a Texas, Florida, Alabama, like Mobile or Louisiana or something like that, they might already only be starting out with 10, right? And so every time you lose, you're losing quite a few. Big factors, you know, as you're syndicating and looking at deals as it relates to insurance, year built is a big factor. Age of roof, wiring, when things have been updated, right? Prior losses from the seller,
Right.
you know, is a big thing, right? So those are big items that kind of move the needle as far as carriers, right? You know, you have a 2010 built place in Arizona that with copper wiring, right? You have 100 carriers, right? You have a 1970s in Louisiana with aluminum wiring, you might have one if you're lucky, right? Like it can really change. And, you know, I guess our secret sauce during the LOI process is we kind of know what that is. We actually have a homemade, if you will, built calculator that we use that we've kind of built. So as soon as you send over that OM, we're doing that, and we kind of know what players we have. And then that's what we put in that high and low end, kind of like, hey, based off of reviewing this, here's the only factors we see that are unknown at this point that might tweak things as you get under contract.
Got it. Well, I didn't know it got titrated that quickly. And I can see, particularly in the more challenging environments that some property like Florida, for example, we know that. Yeah. Okay, so that's how you find it. Now let's talk a little bit about the coverage. And this is where, as an investor, they want to know, you know, the bank, of course, dictates a lot. The lender dictates it because that's our biggest business partner. They only usually own about 70% of the property or whatever, and 30% are limited partners. So what does the bank require you, and how does that protect the passive investors? So tell them a little about the coverage and stuff. It's much different than residential. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the lender will hire what's called a lending consultant, right? So there's groups out there that an Arbor or Bancorp or whoever will hire, right? And they're like a consulting company, and their responsibility is to make sure that the insurance meets the requirements of Arbor or of Bancorp or whoever, right? And that's who us on the insurance side, we are going to go back and forth with to make sure everything covers. So the good thing from the investor standpoint is anytime you're dealing here, you have this consultant who is making sure this asset is covered correctly. Because if they're at 70%, right, on that asset, you know, they care most, right? Good, bad, or otherwise, more than even the investors, right? Like they got a lot of stake in it. So they're going to make sure that it is covered the way they see fit. They're running their own appraisal. They're getting their own replacement costs, right? And very rarely do they come off those numbers. They're very like, here's our minimum requirements. Now we can go more if I'm sitting there thinking like we should or whatever, but normally they get it pretty accurate as far as, you know, where they're coming in, and they're going to dictate, you know, 99% of this deal as it relates to insurance. Like I said, what's good about that is, you know, you have multiple set of eyes on the coverages. You know, the other side of it is, you know, potentially that's where some of the increases to cost come, because they might, you know, have a little bit higher replacement costs. They might protect themselves with 18 months or 24 months worth of rents compared to just having 12 months of rent. You know, certain deductibles they might require, or they might have a higher umbrella limit, but those are usually the kind of the things where we stay. And, you know, I think rest assured, like it gets covered correctly. Really the only variables come down for the syndicator or, you know, in general, as usually relates to deductibles. That's kind of the choice that a syndicator can make.
Right.
This is always a tricky subject, right? Because when a syndicator is going through a deal, right, you know, they're in a position of got to get as best insurance costs as we can at the risk of like how big a deductible might be if a claim would happen. Right.
Right.
So we knew this, and we actually implemented this call. So anytime after a closing. We do a call 2 weeks later with whoever is kind of in charge of the deal, who's going to maybe run operations afterwards, because we know that it's just like ready to the finish line, get the deal closed. We then have this call where we go over, hey, here's how your deductible, here's how it would work. And then here's some options like deductible buy downs, or we can make a change, to, if that deductible doesn't meet, their needs, or, their cash flow, or different things like that after the close. But really getting it to close, it's very much working with the lender, meeting their requirements, at the same time trying to keep our pricing as accurate to the estimate for the syndicator as possible. So it's a lot of juggling in the air, but again, that's kind of what has made us be very helpful in this area, right? Is that we're used to juggling those conversations and keeping these deals in line.
I didn't know that the lenders had an intermediary, like a third party that makes sure it's in compliance with their policies and their requirements for insurance. I did not know that, Matt.
Oh, yes. They'll send us a nice, huge email that's 3 pages long and a giant PDF of it. And really, this is where we come into play, because we're doing so many deals. One, we're seeing the same lending consulting people and companies over and over and over again. 9 out of 10 emails start off with like, hey, Matt and Dom, good to work with you again, right? And why that's important is like we've built that relationship with that consultant. I know what I can push back on. I know where there's going to be no pushback, right? Because if anybody reads that initial email they send and the initial requirements, there's so many things. They just throw this black and white right from lender 101 class at you, right? Like, here's everything we need, right? But then we really know it's actually they need this 80%, and that's where they go firm. So to the point where we have this one consultant that she just like Joe, she's like, I know that you're going to come back with X, Y, and Z. Yes, they're already approved. Like, because they just already know we're coming back being like, they don't need this. They, 10% enough or whatever. But, if you're not in apartments all day, for insurance, right? And you're doing auto insurance, and you're doing this type of insurance, and and then someone just like hits you up to do an apartment, you're just going to follow those requirements to a T. The reason I know that is I did years ago. I didn't know when I first started that you could push back. I didn't know that like that's not the gospel or the like the thing, and then you find that out. So if you're dealing with someone who doesn't know that, and we see this a ton when we take over a client after they've already like closed, like at the renewal and like that. And it's always interesting to see the ones where they send it to me and it'll be all those initial lender requirements, like perfectly. And, it's usually the first thing I can point out of like a way, like, hey, like, here's a great way for you to, make a change. Because for example, for your audience, so they can kind of understand like how these are sometimes like crazy and don't even make sense. Usually the initial email will call for a 10K deductible in Texas. It doesn't exist, right? You can't even get a 10K deductible, right? Like, if I have any insurance people listening, they're probably like, oh yeah, you can. It's maybe 1 out of or 2 out of a couple of carriers, but most part, they're starting at 25K and 2%, right? In a Florida or Texas. So, that's just a prime example for your listeners to see kind of like what the bank sends you, and you got to have someone experienced who can kind of dissect that. For us, it's Dom right now in our office. He goes through them line by line and sends them this like detailed report of like, we're good with this, we're not good with this, no way, yes, all the way down. But that can save 5, 10, 15, 20K, and at let's call it a 5 cap, that's huge for NOI, right? Just those little things.
And that's the value of going through a broker, because you guys are experts. You do it every single day. Dom knows, and he's already got those relationships. So when people try to go off and do things themselves, they think they're saving a little money, but they're not. In the long run, it's really risky because the things you're doing. Okay, so what type of coverage, just to dumb it down for us, like we're used to residential stuff where you have flood coverage and whatever. So this is a business. So you're buying an apartment, you're buying a business. So what are the types of insurance that are usually covered for investors in the property?
To dumb it down, but to make the translation, the coverage is for a home or a 1-unit rental are pretty much the same as 500-unit apartment complex. On the general sense, you have, and I'll go into more detail, but you have property coverage, you have general liability coverage, and then you usually have some form of excess liability. And then if you're in a flood zone, you would have flood insurance, right? And I'll start with flood because that's usually the one that confuses people the most. Is the easy example for one, do I need flood insurance? Is first, we can run a report to see if you're in a flood zone, and that's going to dictate whether the lender is going to require it or not. And then if you're wondering like, okay, what's the difference between a flood policy and water coverage that I have on my normal, property coverage? Very simple. If water hits the ground first before entering, it's flood. If it enters in any other way, through the roof, through the sidewall, out a pipe, through a window, you name it, where it enters, it's going to be covered under your property policy. Most likely, right? Like if I can, like the YouTube people, if I can get that disclaimer, like Matt is not claims handling professional, like,
Exactly.
the one in whatever, like I'm not telling everybody how their claims are going to come out, but that's the general rule of thumb, right? Is that water hits ground first, it's flood. Anything else, it's going to be covered most likely under your property policy. So leading into property is coverage for fire, coverage for vandalism, coverage for wind, hail, hurricanes, tornadoes, right? And that's covering the actual risk, the buildings, and making sure that if something happens to them and there's a loss, you have enough money to, either fix and or rebuild, depending on how, drastic the loss. The other side of the property is, as you can imagine, with it being a business, you have a fire, right? Those tenants can no longer live there. So therefore, they're not going to be paying you rent anymore, right? You still have a pro forma to hit. You still need that rent to come in. That's where you have this thing called business income coverage, which is the other part to your property coverage. That's, one of the most important things that's going to pay you that income for as many months as it takes to get that rebuilt or, fixed, so that you are whole not only for your asset, but also financially as it relates to your revenue. And the thing that you're going to be responsible for is a deductible during the property. Deductibles are part of the property insurance. And for those who maybe don't know what the deductible is, that's your piece in the action, right? So, you have a $25,000 deductible, you have a $100,000 loss, you're responsible for the first 25. Carrier's going to pay $1 after 25,000 up to that 100,000. Very simple explanation. The next is your general liability, right? This is anything, as just like the phrase says, that you're liable for, right? That could happen on the property. If you think of the property as a human, if you will, just to kind of hear it out, anything that property, is liable for. Does someone trip and fall on that property? Right. Does someone get hurt, injured, things like that? That's general liability of. As a syndicator and investor, it doesn't cover for you for your financial advice, right? If someone hears financial advice off here and wants to, come at you, Matt, or come at me for, they did, that's your professional liability, right? So some people, when they're syndicating, they're curious about that. Does my general liability cover me in my actual syndication business? And then it's separate, right? This is for premises liability, is a lot of what people will hear the term. And then last is the umbrella, which it's just, the general liability is usually 1 million per occurrence, 2 million in aggregate coverage. And the umbrella will sit on top of that to just give you higher limits. So, instead of being at 1 million in coverage, you had a 5 million umbrella, and now you have actually 6 million. Or if you had 10, you're at 11 million. And again, that's a comfort from the lender and a comfort from the client. And, the favorite question anybody will always ask you is, well, how much general liability or how much liability should I have, right? And it's the trickiest question out there, because I use the example of someone is cutting the grass, rock hits a little 3-year-old boy's eye, and he loses his sight. How much is that worth, right? It's really that hard to know. So, the general rule of thumb is having enough coverage to offset any assets. So that way, if someone does sue, then there's enough liability that coverage so they can't come after the assets that you have. And again, for those viewing, I know they'll yell at me, oh, the LLC stuff. And I know all these other protections, but just from a simplistic standpoint, that's kind of how that liability will work.
Gotcha. That's good. And so the message here, and I state this when I'm talking to new investors, like, what other investment can you make that is insured? I mean, we literally, if we have loss of rental income because of some natural disaster or whatever, we have insurance for that. And is anything on the stock market you can buy that actually has insurance against it? I mean, it's a physical property value, pretty it's going to go to zero. You know, it's like, okay, it's not like stocks and bonds where it's a piece of paper. This is an actual physical asset. And that's why we have Obie and you, Matt, to make sure we're protecting their interest. And it's one of the best
it becomes
investment.
A business decision, right?
Yeah.
You know, for your investors, for your syndicators, you know, we try, like I said, we try as much as we can to have these conversations. It really comes down to the deductibles, right? You know, the assets are going to be covered for a replacement amount, right? They are going to have coverage for insurance related items, right? Like it's not a maintenance policy, right? Like, so you're, you know, if there's, you know, things like that. So anything related to an insurance loss, you should be covered correctly. And then the business decision is the deductible, right? One, you have the lender weighing in, but two, you as a syndicator, you have to, and this is the conversation we'll have with these individuals after it closes, you know, what happens if you had a loss due to this, or this, right? Do you have that deductible on hand? You know,
yes.
You know, could you get it on hand? Would you have to raise? Would you not have to raise? Would you do it out of pocket up to a certain limit? Those are the items that I can only provide like what it would do. You know, the syndicator or the investor, something like that. Those are the business decisions as it relates to insurance. And you know, the best operators are really taking that into account, right? They're thinking like, oh, I have this property 3, 5, 7 years, whatever the time frame. The odds are I'm going to have one deductible related loss in that time frame. It's just on odds, right? So I need to make sure that at any time a claim happens, I'm ready to. I got this amount of money ready, or here's how I would get it. And if those two you can't do, you need to adjust your deductible. You need to do a buy down. We need to endorse it lower. We need to make corrections. That's the only thing we really can't do for you is make that business decision. We can let you know about it. We can tell you how much it is. You have to come to us and say, hey, that's too much. That doesn't work. And then we have options for you. But that's really the only place where we can't totally take you over the finish line, is that one business decision. And the operators are taking these phone calls with us, and we're usually able to step them through that.
Exactly. And that's right, because it's based on the business plan, and if it's a Class A property or Class C property, our decision is going to change based on that. So yeah, you guys give us all the data to make that decision. Like, I want super high deductible, super low, or something in between, and we just need to make sure we have cash reserves there, and that's part of our contingency plan or stress tests. We can factor that into all of our analysis.
Absolutely. Insurance is very simple, right? The higher deductible is the lower premium. The lower deductible is the higher the premium. And that's the one decision you get to make as an operator is what's my best bang for my buck? Is it, and how much risk do I want to take? I mean, insurance is risk, right? And that's really what you're doing for your property and for your investors is you're making that decision. And, you know, but as an investor, that's the biggest risk you have is that deductible, really, in my opinion, right? You know, if you have an insurance loss, you're going to be taken care of. You're going to be made whole. You know, you're going to be, now it's going to be a pain in the butt to go through a large loss. Like I always say it's inconvenient, not catastrophic, right? That's really the thing. Like it's not going to be fun, but so if you're listening and you are syndicating or you are doing operating, I mean, always an important conversation to have if you haven't already is with your insurance broker of the deductibles. I mean, it's the key piece.
Right. That's one big expense. Well, our time is coming to a close here. That's like a master class on large multifamily insurance and what it means and how our investors in the property and everyone's protected. And it's such a crucial thing. Like I said, second largest expense that we have. So to get you to know you a little bit better, Matt, I got a little rapid fire 5 questions that are kind of fun. Okay. The first one is, and this is an interesting one. What was your nickname as a child?
I I had Splat, I think by my dad, and then I had Sudi by like friends. So
Friends when you're in school.
not super. And then my grandpa was Mafu, but so I didn't have that great. So it was like Suds, Sudi, Mad Dog. Not that creative where I apparently I was born and raised. They were just little variations of my first or last name.
What was the first one when your dad called you? Splat? What's that?
Splat.
The origin?
I don't even know. I must have like ran into something. I don't know, but I just remember him, calling me that. Here it is. The biggest one was Suds that I hated at first, and then I grew to like it. And it was just, I was over at a friend's house, and their little like 3-year-old brother mispronounced my last name and said it was Suds. And then, of course, all my like 11-year-old, 12-year-old friends decided to pick on me up, for that for the longest time, so.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good because mine was Mouthy Matt. So
Matt.
I was waiting for something like that, but yours are much better than mine.
Mouthy Matt. Now, the plan words, I did have mashed potato Matt at one time, and that's just because I wasn't paying attention in math class when they were going through where you had to say your name and then something you liked. And so for some reason, mashed potatoes came to my mind. Probably if I did that one over again, I could have probably figured out another thing that I liked better than mashed potatoes, but it worked.
Okay. The next one, if you had to sing a karaoke night, what would it be? What song would you sing?
I might do Downtown Train by Rod Stewart.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's a good song. Morning or night owl? Morning or night owl? Morning person or night owl?
I have a 1-year-old, so both right now. But historically, I was a night owl.
Okay, good. Me too.
Yeah,
good
but
and then if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
To be honest with you, boring, but I moved to Florida in the Sarasota area in the last 2 years. And right now I've never been happier in a location than I am. I feel like I'm on vacation, and it's the first time that we got to pick an area to live that wasn't like work related. And I think that's what I like about it most. A fun one, Barcelona would be a fun one. I've always enjoyed my time there. By the water, good food, good drinks, things like that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then my last question is, what's one piece of advice you would give to a new investor to help them get better returns? Because I know you're an investor as well. So what's one piece of investing advice with your investor hat on?
100%. This one's the easiest, is invest with an operator or someone that you trust. I think when it comes down to investing, and I work with so many investors around the country and see, some go better than others and some do really well. But, what I really want as an investor for myself, especially in the real estate, is I want to sleep at night. And if I'm so worried about the returns, I must not have faith in the person I put my money with. It's the same thing as stocks or anything else, right? If I don't buy a stock that I can just walk away, never look at it, and come back in 5 years, I'm going to look at it every day, and I'm going to drive it nuts. I don't have a real trust in that company.
Right.
And so that's been my real estate investing and I'm fortunate enough to get to see how operators after the close happen, how they handle claims, how they go. So for me, 100% is I'm investing in the person and not the risk. Maybe this is bad for your viewers, but I'm not detailed and looking at this. I am looking at if a Ricardo calls me, who I've been, invested in, before, I like him, I've seen action, I'm going to invest in that. If Mark called, or Brent, or, any of these individuals that we're doing deals for, I'm in on their deal because I've seen their back of their bubblegum card, and that's what I'm interested in. Right. And the last piece of that, why that's important, is I don't care about the ceiling. I care about the floor. And most people chase the ceiling. So they'll just, whatever shiny object or number that looks good. I want to know that I'm investing in the person that when shit hits the fan, or, when things go wrong, they're going to save that deal. Right. I'm not going to lose as much with them. They're going to do right by me. That's who I care about. The return of my money is always more important than the return on, from my perspective.
Right. Cash preservation. Yes. Very good advice. Very good advice. Well, so one last thing.
Yes.
How can people get a hold of you if
Absolutely.
they want to work with you, the fabulous Matt, Sutika, and Obie?
Easiest two things, any social media platform I'm under, just, Matthew Sutika. There's no other Matthew Sutika out there. So very easy to find. I love any of the direct messages from there. You can text me if you have my cell phone number, or you can shoot me an email at, Matthew@obrisk.com.
Outstanding. Thanks so much for being on the show, Matt. You brought a lot of value and hopefully made it clear the value that the insurance broker brings to a deal and how important the role is. So thanks again, Matt. We'll be talking soon. Take care.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Better Returns, brought to you by Hanson Holdings. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review because it helps others discover this valuable content. If you would like to earn truly hands-off passive income, go to hansonholdings.com, where we help you invest in large apartment complexes to grow your family's wealth. See you next week with another awesome episode. Have a great day.